no question that there is no one at all in the world who can be compared with Noam Chomsky in terms of presenting new ideas, making us think about new problems, and ultimately change the world in which we live. So I very much look forward to that. But I think I'd leave the choice to him as to how he would like to begin. And a great follower, great disciple, a great student of Noam Chomsky.
Also, we are a growing channel. This is Ayushman's vision of bringing very important key figures together in a conversation. So this is a new series we are starting off with Noam and Sen. And if you guys like us to continue, please help us at least like, share, and subscribe. And if you can, even consider giving a super chat or making a small $1 or $2, even that makes a lot, but obviously no pressure. Keep engaging, and we really appreciate you joining us. Ayushman, any final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining in. Those who are in India, a big shout out to you guys, and those from other parts of the world, thank you guys for joining us. However, I want to add that we are planning for an offline conversation and conference here in India. So those guys who are able to give some, donate some, so please do consider that. We might be doing it in August, or we're thinking of 2 panels on inequality and Hindu majoritarianism in India. So yeah, I think we have an exciting summer ahead. So yeah, guys, keep
Also,
joining us.
This reminds me of John Drays. I don't know if he's still online. I don't think he will be. This is very late here in India, but thanks, John Drays, for actually helping us making this possible.
So, Professor, what is it that you're reading now? So, if you can tell us.
Can you see?
Okay.
Yes.
It's a fuse pile.
That's the urgent reading.
Okay. I can see Secret Power, and I couldn't get much.
Okay, here is Professor Sen.
Greeting to everyone, especially to Noam.
Hi, Professor Sen. Can you hear us?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay, so great. We already have Professor Chomsky with us. We would not
Yeah.
And you are live on YouTube. Our viewers from across the world are watching you. And we would not spend a lot of time in introduction, which we would add later on. So we just want to jump right in so as to maximize our time. So yeah, Ayushman would like to open this session officially with a question to Professor Sen.
Okay.
Hello, Professor Sen. It's an honor to have you. Thank you, Professor, for joining. Professor, we all know you have taught aspects of Professor Chomsky's work in your class. So can you tell us a little bit about what kind of things you have taught about Chomsky in your classes?
That I would rather hear from Noam, rather than lecturing Noam on what he should be teaching there. No, I very much look forward to hearing how Noam would present to us the relevance of issues that are central today. And there's no question that there is no one at all in the world who can be compared with Noam Chomsky in terms of presenting new ideas, making us think about new problems, and ultimately change the world in which we live. So I very much look forward to that. But I think I'd leave the choice to him as to how we would like to begin. And a great follower, great disciple, a great student of Noam Chomsky. So I read everything we write with the greatest of interest, and that applies today also. And so I look forward to that. At some stage, I will have something to say of my own, but I don't think that's how we are going to begin this seminar today.
Unfortunately, I am restricted to captions, which are giving a very inadequate account of what you're saying. Could you repeat more clearly? Yes, so
I
we
guess,
can get the essence of
I guess,
what
Noam,
Professor Sen said.
Professor Sen said he would like you to begin with your initial remarks on what you think of him or his works in general, and then he would like to listen to it and then respond. And he says he is a great disciple. He uses the word disciple of your work.
Well, with regard to Professor Sen's work, of course, goes without saying that the highly original and significant work on capabilities is a major contribution to moral theory, political theory, concentration on the ends of life, the functioning that is available that leads us to have to desire and to have the right to develop our capacities to the full, critique of utilitarianism. All of this is a major contribution to contemporary thought. But I should say that personally, other aspects of Professor Sen's work have been of particular interest to me because of their significance for direct critical issues that we face. So the work on the non-existence of famines, for example, the demonstration that famines are policy choices, not events that are inexorable in the physical world. The analysis of development and comparisons, for example, of India and China and the ways in which they've taken different development paths with the costs and benefits which that has led, particularly during the comparisons that partly work with Jean Drèze about the years when comparison is really very straightforward from independence till for the following 20 years. That's very illuminating work, which has lots of significance with regard to, for example, how programs of rural health and development, though they didn't increase GDP, led to enormous saving of lives and creation of human capacities that laid the basis for further development. I think all of that work is highly illuminating, very relevant to problems that exist right now in India, for example, where you can drive down a street and see enormous wealth and utter misery. That's always worth remembering, that these are policy choices, not things that develop inevitably through the workings of nature or even society or institutions.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting that the issue of India and China has come up, and particularly Chomsky himself has had interesting ideas on that, which are very relevant to as things stand today. To take one very elementary thing, I think Noam mentioned the fact that India at one stage was quite successful in suppressing, in fact, eliminating famines in a way that China at that time wasn't. And yet, if you look at the longevity of people in China and in India, the Chinese were living many more thousands of years than the Indians were. So that even in terms of sheer survival, the saving of life in China, despite the famines, was more striking than the saving of life of India, despite there being no famine. I think they are striking contrast. Everything, I think it would be very difficult today to claim that somehow India has been able to achieve some things in the quality of life and how people are able to live day to day. That if there's anything superior in the Indian pattern compared with the Chinese, so that's simply not the case. No, I think I tend to take the liberty of thinking a little about history in all these cases. India is an exceptionally peculiar country because if you look at Indian history, beginning with the first All India empire, namely the Mauryas, in particular Ashoka, and go all the way to the most glittering Indian empire, namely the Mughals, and in particular Akbar, you find a kind of achievement that widely shared in a way that you may not be able to find in corresponding period in China, or for that matter, in Europe. On the other hand, there are inequalities of a major kind in India right from the beginning. You see that even to take an example, even in Upanishad, which are basically reflection of Vedic thinking in India, and going back 3,000 years or so. People would note the fact that many of the achievements are shared by people who are quite ordinary. Upanishad is full of stories of ordinary people having extraordinary things to say. And yet, in the middle of it all, when one of them in one of the Upanishads says that, says something quite exceptionally wise, the other person asks, how do you account for your special wisdom? And then he himself replies, I could have asked what background, what caste, not to make any special reflection on that, but caste is a factor across India and has been so for thousands of years. And he said, what is your caste? I can tell you that someone who can speak so eloquently, so wisely, I don't have to ask what your caste is. I know that you are from the Brahmin caste. Now, how could a conversation 3,000 years ago refer to someone being a Brahmin when he could have been a member of any group whatsoever? And it's not a thought you find in China, not a thought you find in Italy or Greece either. Now, how come this is present and contrast with Ashoka's egalitarianism, Akbar's seeing every human being in the same way? And I think if we try to understand why inequality of such a desperate kind that we see in India today survives, we have to connect that with historical reality of India, that we have not been able to eliminate these inequalities. And going further down, we could say we have not really tried very hard to eliminate these inequalities. And if China today does, in terms of common people's lives, do much better than India, it's not because of any lack of trying. And, the present government in India is particularly unattractive, at least to me, because it had such crude inequality. And yet, is there something here that links with the past? Is there something grossly unequal which India could have tried to eliminate but haven't tried? And I think these questions are very central, and also in our language they're reflected in the way that Chomsky had made us understand how far the reach of language can be, even when we are not talking explicitly about language of people. So I think there is an enormous fluidity of thought that we ought to pay attention to. Many people are surprised, I certainly am, that a government which is as crude as the present government of India is expected to win the coming election and won the last election handsomely. How could that happen, given their record, when workers at the beginning of COVID lost their jobs, never got them back, had no opportunity of earning an income, had no chance of taking a transport, a train or bus to go home if they came from far away as labor. How come, despite that, a government of that kind could win? Why is it the question of inequality occupies such a low position in today's political dialogue in India? What's wrong with that? That's a question that comes in my mind all the time. And in many of them, my understanding of what's going on is deeply affected by what I've read from Chomsky, understood from his writing, and what has made me think that there is a world about which we ought to think a great deal more than we in fact do.
Both of you are kind of, Professor Sen and Chomsky have kind of guided us in times of darkness, you can say, because Chomsky always tells us about hope, and Professor Sen have a very, decent understanding of philosophy. So one question comes to my mind, like why has philosophy attracted you both, and what kind of role do you think philosophy can play, for the humanity in the future?
You're asking this
One
to
of my
no, Chomsky.
one
Yeah.
of my favorite lines from a group of philosophers, John Locke's observation that his task was to clear away the underbrush so that successful inquiry, research, understanding could be developed. I think a lot of philosophical contributions have effectively been trying to clear the underbrush, opening the way to further inquiry, research, understanding. In fact, that's been, for me at least, the contribution of philosophy. But open way to discover, understand, create, invent, take any issue you like today. It's easy to see how much underbrush has to be cleared away if we hope to deal with it in any sensible fashion.
I very much agree with that. And I would also say that once this underbrush is removed in the way that we were just discussing, there's no subject can take, well, actually, that's too much. Let me put it more positively. Philosophy can take a position which no other subject can, in fact, take. And that's something which we ought to bear in mind. And in some ways, any subject that's central to our understanding, whether it be rationality or basic science or poetry, there's something that philosophy can offer that no other subject can so easily present to us. So I think, and also to that, let's also add that when we try to understand something in a very general way, philosophy again helps us greatly. I could understand when I first read and was thrilled by Noam Chomsky ideas about language, about communication, about knowledge. The thrill was both a thrill about language and knowledge, but also a thrill about a philosophical understanding of how we live, how we communicate, how we keep up with each other. This is very central.
Okay, am I audible now? Noam, can you hear me now?
Barely, but I can read you at least.
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is something I didn't expect. So maybe my friend Ayushman would read out the question, the next question to you. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a question from John Reyes. So he kind of helped us getting in touch with Professor Sen. So his question is to both of you. So here is his question. Both of you have strong commitments to individual freedom and social justice. Do you think that it is possible to give an argument for these commitments based on reason alone? Or do they also involve beliefs or feelings that are beyond rational argument? If so, where do these beliefs or feelings come from? So Noam, if you can respond to it first. And
Well, reason alone is reason has to start some premises, then you can try to, but without the premises, you can't do much. It's like an axiom system that has no axioms. So where do the premises come from? Take, say, the golden rule, something which you find in some version of it in just about every culture. But why should we accept it? Suppose that what you do to others is wrong. Why should what they do to, why should you want them to do that to you? It's based on already there's a mass of assumptions there. Where do the assumptions come from? Well, the assumptions, if we pursue it far enough, the assumptions come from our basic fundamental nature. We are organic creatures. We have built-in needs, capacities, goals, beliefs, part of our moral nature. we can try, in fact, I think you can see the course of human society over thousands of years as trying to explore more deeply our fundamental nature and try to find what is essential to it, what has distorted it, what has misled it, things that in the past were considered not only normal but admirable are now considered totally unspeakable. As we, not very long ago, in fact, I can give examples from 10 or 20 years ago of things that were common discourse that now would be regarded as almost unspeakable and intolerable. I think we are exploring our fundamental nature, and it grows out of internal, the way we are constituted as organisms. There's, in fact, by now, interesting empirical research of comparative studies, infant studies, children, seeing what the essential moral principles are that become modified and shaped and often distorted by culture, institutional structures, which we try to escape from by reason, by thinking through the effect of the modifications, amplifications, distortions that modify and often corrupt our fundamental nature. It's a constant search, goes on in moral philosophy for millennia, goes on in our ordinary lives as we try to think our way through personal problems, dilemmas, bringing our rational capacities to try to evaluate how institutions and cultural assumptions can, in many ways, divert us from pursuing our true nature. But by reason alone, I think you can find essentially nothing.
I agree with that, but also with a bit of a caveat, because I think Noam is right that reason alone would not deliver very much. And yet, at some level, reason ends up being central to what we are trying to do. And it's a subject on which Chomsky himself has contributed very fundamental thought. But it's, for one thing, if something appears to us to be not reasonable, then there is a kind of failure we are noticing, which is a failure of reason, but at the same time, it's a very foundational failure for human thinking, human understanding, human comprehension, and ultimately our ability to understand our own thoughts. So if we look at that, so reason plays a part, which on its own, and Chomsky is absolutely right, yeah, I believe, the reason plays a part which is essential, but something I would claim, at least argue, is a bit more important than almost any other kind of way of comprehending each other. Now, it still doesn't make reason in any way adequate on its own. Even the examples I was giving about Sadie in the debate about a low cost and high cost person. If somebody says, I can see that you belong to the highest class. Why? Because you argue so well. But then belonging to the highest class, how much of a critical activity is it? How much do we care what the origins are of people from different groups? So in some essential way, the role of reason cannot be in itself an adequate justification of anything. We to say, I believe this tradition has reason behind it, may be true, and yet it's not definitive. There could be reason behind it, and so could be another position which is opposite that, and still has some kind of reason behind it, which is not easy to reject. So I think what we're dealing with is a kind of common currency which reason is. It's a currency that goes from hand to hand, make us understand in some way what is it that we are trying to tell each other. And as the Stanford philosopher Davidson says that in order to understand why someone is doing something, we have to understand what's the reasoning behind what he is trying to do. You have to put yourself in the position of a person and then see what he's trying to do. You see a person taking a matchstick and a box of matches and hitting one with the other. And somebody says, why are you doing it? And if you reply saying, well, I love it, I love what happened. But that's really not going to get you very far. On the other hand, if you say, I'm trying to light a match, I think you are saying something which does communicate quite extensively across the world. Now, when you have come to a category of thought which has that kind of a virtue, then surely it must have some claim to specialness. And I believe that reason has that specialness. And yet, that doesn't mean you can do without non-reason concerns, non-reason values. and proceed in that direction. So I think the question you asked is a complicated one, but it's something which we might wish to think about in order to understand both the excellent, in particular, as I was trying to say a few minutes earlier, the common currency feature of reasoning on one side and the ability to communicate without hampering each other's thoughts on the other. So I think this is a very tiny domain of thought which I've been trying to bring up. But the domain of reason is, of course, much more firm, much more central than most lines of thinking that we can understand. So, yes, two who are for a reason, but if somebody is inclined not to do the third, saying I would like to understand better in what way reason plays this role that other ideas do not have, then that's fine too. Two who may not be better than three, but two who is certainly better than one. We have to accept.
Might just add that with regard to reason, there have been perfectly rational arguments throughout history, modern history, arguing that slavery is a great benefit to the human species.
Yeah.
And you can make a very solid argument for that. John Calhoun, the leading spokesperson for the slave states in the United States, gave quite convincing arguments for the wonders of slavery. He used as his model classical Greece. We all greatly admire the high civilization, the wonderful thoughts, wonderful ideas that developed in classical Greece. And he pointed out what is obvious to anybody who reads the Platonic dialogues, that when you hear Socrates and his friends philosophizing, Socrates asking difficult questions, exploring what people think, they come out with ideas, he refutes and corrects them. How could they do all this if it were not for the slaves that were serving them in the luxurious homes where they were meeting? So slavery was absolutely fundamental to the creation of classical thought and all of its glories. Throughout history, women have been treated the same way. If they didn't do all those things, how could we reach our wonderful ideas and great discoveries? The arguments are hideous, but they're not irrational.
So, yeah, I guess this brings us to to a very related question, which is democracy and development. in Professor Sen's work, we are told very clearly that democracy and development are two related constitutive components. I just wanted to ask Professor Sen, and then Professor Chomsky can respond, or we can go the other way around. What makes these two categories interrelated? Is there any categorical link between the two, or is it just works? What do you think about that? Go ahead.
Shall I?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I should start. Well, I think if democracy means having the opportunity to take effective control of your own life, the decisions that matter to you in your life, participating in them effectively, if that's what democracy means, and if development means creation of an environment, a world in which fundamental human needs and goals can be have an opportunity to mature, to grow, to develop, to become flourish. If that's what democracy and development mean, then they're very closely related. But is that what they mean? Not in the real world. There are theories of democracy throughout the 20th century, very extensive work done on democratic theory by leading figures. I'll keep to the United States, but many others. So the leading public intellectual of the 20th century, Walter Lippmann, was a great theorist of democracy. He was Woodrow Wilson, Roosevelt, Kennedy, liberal. His idea of democracy was that it shouldn't exist. Literally, he said, democracy is a problem. We have to prevent it. People have, he's speaking of the United States, he says, people are incapable of pursuing their own interests, as he and his associates, Reinhold Niebuhr, Harold Lasswell, as they argued, people are too stupid and ignorant to pursue their own interests. So therefore, we must have ways to, as Lippmann put it, manufacture consent and control their thoughts and beliefs and make sure that they're marginalized. And we, the responsible men, will be free, as he put it, from the trampling and the roar of the bewildered herd. They have a role to be spectators. They can show up every once in a while, push a lever, then they go back home, attend to their own concerns. Well, we run their affairs. It's the founder of modern liberal political science, one of the founders, Harold Lasswell, said we should not be misled by democratic dogmatisms about people having the ability to pursue their own interests. They're incapable of that. So for their own benefit, we should determine what's right for them. That's the dominant theory of democracy. Well, if that's democracy, then it's going to lead, you can imagine what kind of development it's going to lead to. Let's talk about development. What does it mean? Suppose you produce more cars, more traffic jams, waste more time in your life, increase emissions, bring us closer to the precipice where we'll all be destroyed. That's development. Increases gross domestic product, produces more jobs, more profits. What's the problem? Well, a number of problems. Development, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of democracy do we mean? What kind of development do we mean? Then you can think of forms of democracy that will enhance our capabilities, our self-realization, our control of our own lives, and so on. you can think of forms of development which will lead to a better life for all, not just for people living in super luxury. But until those questions are answered, I can't see that there can be a general comment on, an abstract comment on democracy and development.
I very, very much agree with that. And it points to something that deserves much greater discussion right now than it's tending to get. And in very odd ways, democracy comes in as a figure of speech here, there, and everywhere. But a serious understanding of what democracy stands for, what it demands, and why it is centrally placed in a way nothing else can compete with it. I think these are very significant things to consider. If you were to attend another meeting of this kind, you don't have very much time. Yes, we have only 5 or 6 minutes left, I think. But I think democracy would be a good subject to talk about.
If I can quickly squeeze in one final question, because I think this would help us end on a mild note of disagreement. And I want to discuss capitalism, particularly the question of wage. In Noam's work, we find that wage is something, at least philosophically, unacceptable, if not at a practical level. And in Sen's work, if my reading is correct, then wage is one of the entitlements, like one of the devices within a broad range of entitlement devices that can, sometimes it can lead to famine, it collapse of it can lead to famine, but sometimes it can also bring in resources. So if Noam, you can just argue your case against wage, and then Sen can respond to that and we can wrap it up there.
About wage labor and its...
Yes. And why you think it's slavery, why there is a philosophical case to argue for that.
My own view is pretty much that of industrial workers, very lucidly in their own publications in the early stages of industrial capitalism, both in Britain and the United States. Their position was that to be subordinated to a master during most of your waking life is a major attack on your dignity, on your rights, on your everything that is essential to your human essence. And that's what wage labor is. Puts you under the control of a master who has total control over you. There is, of course, an argument that these are free contracts, but as Anatole France famously pointed out, the rich and the poor are equally free to sleep under the bridge at night. For the owner, the employer, the choice is to have you be the servant or somebody else. For the person who's trying to survive, the choice is, do I submit myself as somebody who serves the master, or do I starve? That's not a free contract. The contract, the wage labor contract, I think is just illegitimate. Just like selling yourself into slavery is illegitimate, or a marriage contract, traditional marriage contract that requires that the wife be the property of the husband. It's illegitimate to start with. It's a fundamental attack on human rights and dignity. You can say that it is a way of leading to development and so on. I actually don't even think that's true, but self-managed work, labor, creative work under one's own control in mutual cooperation with others can do as well or better. But quite apart from that, even if it were true, it's illegitimate, just as slavery is illegitimate, even if it does lead to classical Greek culture. These are fundamental questions, I think. There's a deep immorality at the core of it. It doesn't matter what the consequences are.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think it's a subject, this was very beautifully put, very elegantly put too, that at some stage we ought to have a bit more discussion about ways. One of the striking things, for example, is if you're looking at a classic book named the Karl Marx's Capital, Volume 1. And if you read it, one of the things that's striking is at some stage in the footnote, Marx asked the question, what is the most exciting thing that's happened in the modern world? Is anything exciting happening? And I was a young man in college in Calcutta, and I was reading it, and I said, surely he's going to talk about the Paris Commune and the communal attachment to each other, but not a bit of it. What Marx says in the front is that it's the American Civil War and the understanding that wage is a central area of our independence that we have to place there. Now, this is the same man, namely Marx, who would soon argue that in many ways the wage labor in Chicago didn't always have as good a life as some non-wage earners. And yet, somehow wage and the wage of what the wage stands for has a role that you cannot dedicate to anything else in that context. So when people argued, for example, that feudal lords lived on the wages of serfs or wages of other people in an inferior position in social relationship, then you say something about wages which you would not be able to understand by escaping that central source. So I think the issue that Chomsky raised there is absolutely central to human living. And given the nature of time, I would suggest that we do come back to that at some stage, which would be a lovely discussion.
Thanks, Professor Sen and Professor Chomsky, for your time. I'm really sorry for that little bit of glitch, but we are so glad that we could do this. And one sentence comments from Noam and from Professor Sen to our viewers.
No. The one sentence that is constantly in my mind is that the human species is on the verge of suicide. We are on a course which is going to lead to destruction of organized human life on Earth. We have a brief amount of time to deal with it. We know ways to do it. We must engage ourselves with dedication and commitment to grasping the opportunities that do exist and are not going to exist for long, to move forward to create a much better world. It's possible, but it's not going to happen by itself.
I see the deep air of concerns, skepticism, and even pessimism in that diagnosis. And yes, I agree that the basic point that the diagnosis is making is correct. Where I would try to go beyond drawing on Chomsky's own work would be to say, okay, that's where we are. Is there something we can do about it? Now, the idea that every pessimism, every concern that seems depressingly real to us must have a creative ameliorative solution is not correct, I think. There are many problems do not offer that kind of way out. And yet, I would argue that in this humanities central existential concern, there is something which is both constructive and challenging. So I very much accept Chomsky's understanding that there is a concern that's overwhelmed other features of human thought. And yet, I would like to say we can go beyond in one way or another. And Chomsky himself has shown that in many of his writings. So I would hope we come back to this question. You wanted a solution in one sentence. You may not quite get that. On the other hand, you could easily get an inspiration to look for that one sentence which can make us both wiser as well as tragically wiser, by which I mean the wisdom in question here, coming not from some kind of consolation, but from some basic ability to overwhelm and overcome our difficulties that we still could think about dream about and make the young and the old inspired by. That thought is in my mind without losing the idea that there is a deep concern, deep vulnerability, which we cannot overlook in the world in which we live today.
Okay, on that note of pessimism of intellect and optimism of will, we wrap it up. And once again, thank you so much, Noam and Professor Sen, for joining us. It has been it was such a pleasure and an exciting moment.
And
Have a
thank
nice
you,
one.
thank you for arranging it.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed the opportunity to be with you.
Yeah.
Thanks.